Hello, friends. We are back, and I am hoping that the audio is actually working on this. I've been having problems with my audio lately, but I'm so glad to be back. So, if this is your first time joining us, welcome. My name is Amanda, aka AGB, and I am a librarian by trade, also a historian, and I'd like to welcome you to AGB Reads History. Now, typically, we gather together when I have a schedule set up to read books that are in the public domain, important pieces of literature. Well, with what is going on in the world right now, I realized that I needed to do something. I'm white, I have an amazing amount of privilege, and I need to be able to use this privilege for a purpose. Also, the area of history that I work closest with is the Japanese American internment during World War II. And with the travesty that occurred in Atlanta, there has almost every single social media post I've seen lately has referenced that folks need to realize the history of racism against Asian American individuals of Asian descent, Pacific Islanders, AAPI. They need to realize that this is not a new phenomenon. And one thing that folks have also been talking about is, again, it's the history. So you've got the Chinese Exclusion Acts, you've got just amazing amounts of racism. You've got the six camps that would be associated with American Armed Forces bases overseas. And one thing that's talked about is that folks need to know about the Japanese American internment. And that is where my knowledge can actually come in handy. So, what I've done is I'm not going to be reading today. I'm going to be providing some resources. I'm going to be providing some books that you need to seek out and read. And what I've done is I've broken it into fiction and nonfiction. And I've done it by age range. So, we're going to have early elementary, which is grades K through 2. Later elementary, which is grades 3 through 5, middle grades 6 through 8, high school 9 through 12, and then adult, which is basically 9 through 12 and beyond. I've also only highlighted materials that have a coordinating resource page on Densho, the Japanese American resource groups actual like physical repository that they have. This has been a fun project for me to work on. It was really difficult narrowing down some of these titles because there were some titles that I'm like, oh, I really want to talk about this. It doesn't have a resource page yet. Or, oh, this would be great. I already have a nonfiction title. So we're going to break it down into two sections. There's going to be fiction, so basically historical novels, books, and then nonfiction. So this is also going to include memoirs. So are you ready? I'm actually really excited about this. All right, let's see if this works. See, I have had way too much fun learning OBS, which is the software that I'm now using. What y'all are seeing is actually a set of graphics that I have created just for this situation. So the first book that we are going to talk about, we're going to go fiction first, and then we're going to go to nonfiction. So the very first book that we're going to be talking about, and y'all have to excuse me as I look down at my phone because the way I've got my screen laid out, it's kind of difficult for me to see exactly what I'm doing. So bear with me for like 2 seconds while I get this pulled up on my phone. Pardon. Also, while I'm doing that, you're going to notice that on the screen, it's got the title of the work, it's got who it was authored by. There's also a QR code. If you scan that QR code, that will take you directly to the Densho Resource Center's page for this particular book. Now, the Resource Center is going to have links out to teacher resource guides. It's got background information. It's got links out to associated Densho encyclopedia pages. It can have links to other topics. And if at all possible, it's going to have a link to the book itself. I tried to select books that are either widely available in libraries, easily accessible for a low cost through an independent bookseller, or available through the internet in some shape, form, or fashion. So let's see if I have bought myself enough time to be able to pull these up on my phone. Y'all will have to see what I've done with this. Aha, now I have them pulled up on my phone. So the first book is going to be our early reader, our K through 2. So this is a picture book. It is entitled A Place Where Sunflowers Grow, written by Amy Lee Tai and illustrated by Felicia Hoshino. What's great about this book is it's bilingual. So you're going to have these beautiful watercolor illustrations. On one page is going to be the English text, and on the next page is the corresponding Japanese text. It's not Romanized Japanese either, it's actually kanji. So if you are, for example, learning Japanese, this would be a great title even if you're an adult. So the whole point behind this book is it's about a little girl named Mari, and her family is interred in the Utah desert during World War II. She enrolls in an art class and plants sunflower seeds. But it seems impossible that anything beautiful could survive being behind barbed wire. This is a good book to start a conversation with a child about what the internment camps were. So, our next book that we're going to be talking about is going to be actually one of my perennial favorites. This is appropriate for grades 3 through 5 and above. This is called Fish for Jimmy. It's written and illustrated by Katie Yamasaki. When I first started doing more research on the Japanese American internment, I had a couple of friends that were getting their licensure in elementary education, and they asked for my advice on a particular book that they needed to seek out to teach their children. This is the book that I absolutely recommend. The illustrations are beautiful, and the story is incredibly poignant behind it. So for two boys in a Japanese American family, everything changed when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor and the United States went to war. With the family forced to leave their home and go to an internment camp, Jimmy loses his appetite. Older brother Taro takes matters into his own hands and, night after night, sneaks out of the camp and catches fresh fish. Doesn't give away the entire story. This is a good book for starting a conversation about what childhood looked like behind the camp walls and why these individuals were in these barbed wire facilities. So it's a good time to start talking about the racism that was involved in the decision to incarcerate these Japanese American families. Our next title is going to be for our middle readers, so grades 6 through 8. And this book is called Dust of Eden, written by Mariko Nagai. What do you do when your home country treats you like an enemy? This memorable and powerful novel in verse, written by award-winning author Mariko Nagai, explores the nature of fear, the value of acceptance, and the beauty of life. So this book is a good jumping off point for talking about what camp life looked like. It's also a good jumping off point to talk about the xenophobia and the racism that resulted after camp life as well. It is a absolutely beautiful book. It is a short chapter book, but it is one of those books that really gets the reader involved, so this is a definite recommendation. So for our high school readers, y'all, this was the hardest decision I came across. There were so many books that I wanted to recommend for a high school audience. I wound up selecting Tule Lake, which is written by Edward Miyakawa. Tule Lake was likely the first novel by a Japanese American set in one of the World War II concentration camps to be published when it first appeared in 1979. It was also notable for its unflinching portrayal of life in the most repressive of camps. So this was one of the most real portrayals, and it was written by a gentleman who was in one of the camps, specifically Tule Lake. It's not an autobiography, but he took his experiences and superimposed them into a fictional life. You're going to see this quite a bit. There's also, in most of the entries on the resource guide, there's going to be an entire section on historic accuracy. I tried to select titles that were as historically accurate as possible, especially when it is looking at the fiction titles, because sometimes it's hard to conflagrate fiction versus nonfiction, especially for young readers, and I wanted these to be as realistic as possible. So this next one, again, this was a hard decision for me to make as far as the adult books. With, like, I almost went with On the Quarter of Bitter and Sweet. Actually, that would have been good for early readers too. Snow Falling on Cedars. There's just so many good adult fiction novels centered around the internment. I almost went, no, boy, that was really hard not to pick that book. But I wound up going with A Bridge Between Us by Julie Shigekumi. With the touch and power of a master storyteller, Julie Shigekumi gracefully interweaves four distinct voices to shape a moving story of love and the courage it requires. So, like some of my favorite other novels, I will admit I love novels that bounce back and forth between different narrators. This goes back and forth between four Japanese women that are in the same family, that experienced not only the internment, but the generational trauma afterwards, the racism afterwards and beforehand. So it's this beautiful interweaving of stories back and forth, and it's a true story of family as well. Highly recommended. Definitely going to read. You should definitely read that one. So our next section that we're going to talk about is nonfiction resources. So being a historian, I wanted to make sure that there were some actual memoirs, that there were some actual retellings of what happened with Japanese American individuals. So starting with our early readers, our first early reader book is, if you have not read Barbed Wire Baseball and you are a parent, you and your child should sit down and read this book, especially if you are a baseball fan. So this is a children's picture book that focuses on the true story of Kenichi Zenimura, an Issei baseball pioneer who builds a baseball field at the Gila River concentration camp. And this is written by Marissa Moss and illustrated by Yuko Shimizu. For some reason, my eyes just kind of went, not gonna let me read. Yuko Shimizu. Barbed Wire Baseball, especially if you love movies like A League of Their Own, Field of Dreams, if you love baseball at all, you need to read this book. It's approachable. It's written for a younger audience, but it's honestly super approachable for an adult audience as well. If you have not read it, please go read this book. Our next selection, so this is going to be for our late elementary age, is The Invisible Thread, written by Yoshiko Uchida. Memoir for young adult readers by the acclaimed children's book author that covers her charmed childhood in Berkeley, California, and her wartime incarceration during World War II. It's a really good balance between pre, during, and post-war life, written from the experience of a child that was around the same age as the book is directed towards. She has written other amazing children's books. I am blanking on the titles of them right off the top of my head right now, but her work is just, it's really approachable, and it's a really good way to start conversations with kids. Now, this next book I threw in here, this was kind of a, I have to use this book sort of situation. This is one of my favorite titles ever. This is Dear Miss Breed, True Stories of the Japanese American Incarceration During World War II and a Librarian Who Made a Difference, written by Joanne Oppenheim. Dear Miss Breed was one of the first books I ever read about the internment that I finally had that aha, I'm in the right field moment, because I went to college to be a high school history teacher and wound up becoming a librarian. I love my librarian life, and I was always going, oh, I'm going to have to leave, this research passion of mine behind. Oh, no. Oh, no. So Clara Breed was a librarian in, now I'm blanking because I have read so many different titles about librarians in the internment. I believe she was in San Francisco, California. Either San Francisco or Santa Monica. I can't remember which one off the top of my head. And when they received word that her students, because she taught at a largely Japanese school, were going to be shipped off to camps, she gave all of the students postcards and asked them to write to her. And she wrote back to them and provided books for them. It's not a title that promotes a white savior kind of movement, but it's a good reminder, especially to those of us that work in libraries, that our work makes a difference, and we make a difference in our, if you work with children, you make a difference in your children's lives, you make a difference in the adults' lives, students' lives, what have you. And the impact of a good librarian can go a long way. It is a book that you will cry at. Actually, a lot of these books you will wind up crying at or getting angry. It's one of those things that it's designed to evoke emotion out of you, because this is a topic that you should be passionate about, that you should have an awareness about. Highly, highly recommend this book. I never got to utilize it for a senior thesis or anything. Well, specifically my work in graduate school, because it is written for a younger audience. My goal one of these days is to actually write a more adult academic focused book on libraries within internment camps, and actually looking at them to analyze, were they helping Japanese Americans, basically, my brain just kind of went, don't you love it when that happens? So I want to look at if these libraries were used by the War Relocation Authority to basically further this kind of Americana, pro-internment kind of movement, or if they were a way for Japanese Americans that were in these incarceration facilities to hold on to their heritage, to hold on to their culture. It's been really interesting to see how libraries within the internment camps developed. At most internment camps, the library was one of the first facilities to open, even when they were in their temporary incarceration facilities at places like mining camps and racetracks. Sorry, I got a little bit off topic with my research passion. My bad. I am so sorry about that. So what I want to bring up next, the next title, we're moving into all of our young adult titles, is, as I get my phone back up and running where it needs to go. So the next one, and this was one that I almost had, I went back and forth on whether I wanted to put this on the high school list or the adult list, because it can go both directions. But this was a book that I felt like absolutely needed to be talked about, as was the next title. So this is Gasa Gasa Girl Goes to Camp, written by Lily Yuriko Nakai Harvey. Evolving from captions that accompanied displays of the author's post-war paintings, this book intersperses stories of life in the camps with recollections of happier days with her parents, brother, and aunts in Hollywood, California before the war. Lily was an artist, and part of what's in the book is these beautiful full-color reproductions of some of her watercolor paintings. So it rides this beautiful line between art book and memoir, but seeing her words interspersed with her art makes it even more powerful. So the last title that I wanted to talk about, and this is for basically 9 to 12 and beyond, is Beyond Loyalty, The Story of AAPI by Minoru Kyoto. This is a book that was originally published in Japanese in 1990 and then was translated to English around 1997. And when I say kibei, that means this is an individual who was born in the United States and then returned to Japan to do their schooling. That was actually a decently common practice for especially high school aged Japanese Americans, was to return to Japan for high school and college. And this is, like I said, a memoir of Kibei scholar Minoru Kyoto that focuses on the difficult World War II years that saw him incarcerated in American concentration camps and eventually renouncing his U.S. citizenship. So the renunciation of U.S. citizenship was a tactic used by the American government to essentially kind of weed down the Japanese population on the West Coast. They gave individuals in the camps the ability to renounce their American citizenship and basically be shipped back over to Japan, never to return to the United States. That was declared, their actions were declared illegal in the mid-1950s. But it was, like I said, it was used as a tactic to kind of basically thin out the Japanese American population. Not a lot of individuals took part in that. And I believe, Minoru was on one of the first ships that departed from America. Because I believe he was interred at Tule Lake, but I could be incorrect on that. The problem when you're when you've read so many books on something is they all kind of blend together in your mind in the best possible ways. So after we talk, I am going to put all of these titles with the nice little graphics up on Instagram and Facebook. So if you're not following us at AGB Reads on Instagram and Facebook, please do. And as far as the schedule going forward, it is kind of a crazy time of the year as far as academia goes. And I'm not quite sure when my schedule is going to pan out a little bit. I would love to start doing some afternoon readings with folks again. Maybe not 5 days a week, maybe cutting down to 3 days a week, or maybe even just 1 day a week where we knock out like 3 chapters at the same time together. I do want to start having a specific list, basically a specific schedule that we're following, mainly because we have this lovely reading nook. And I still keep on wanting to use our lovely reading nook that we've come up with. And if you're noticing the lighting now, I got a ring light. And the ring light is really cool and it's making a difference. So, getting back on a serious topic, I hope what today did was it gave you some resources to be able to start learning and to start growing and to start having conversations about what Asian racism looks like here in the United States. It is a thing. It is not a new thing. This is decades, centuries old. And it needs to stop. Okay? That's me kind of dropping the knowledge right there. So, until next time, my dears, wear your mask and wash your hands. Stay apart temporarily until we can come back together permanently. Get your shot when it's your turn. I am 2 weeks removed from my first vaccine, and I cannot wait to get my second because it's keeping my family and my community safe, and that's incredibly exciting. Also, I miss people, and I want to see y'all again soon. Take care of yourselves. This is still hard right now, especially my AAPI friends. Please take care of yourselves. If you need somebody to just listen, I am here. I want to honor your stories. I want to honor your presence. Just reach out if you just need somebody. I'm here. I love you. And as always, I want everyone to enjoy every sandwich. That can be hard sometimes. Enjoy every sandwich means don't take anything for granted. Right, Dad? Right. So, until next time, I love y'all. And we will see each other soon. Bye.